We're going to get started again with our panel session. Awesome. So this is the Emerging Trends in IoT panel. I'm Leah Liebler, Head of Marketing at Wilderness Labs. And would you each like to introduce yourself? We can go.
Yeah, so I'm Mike James, CEO of Avalonia UI.
Hey, my name's John Kattenhorn. I'm the co-founder of 4RD.
And my name is Fred Barrett. I'm CTO of Allyn Technology Group.
Awesome. So a little bit more, would love to understand a little bit more about your experience, your background in IoT too, just talking about how you got here, your interests, what is the company you work for, so that would be great.
Yeah, so my background is like UI development. As I mentioned when I was speaking with Brian earlier, the keynote, a lot of what we do is helping businesses with HMI solutions. So they need to display some data on a screen. They want to reuse their existing .NET skills. So we provide a platform for them to do that. So from the IoT perspective, we're at like quite high level. We're not on the super low power devices that I think a lot of people here will be using, but we kind of play into that ecosystem.
Okay.
Yeah, so I came to IoT probably 2015. I came from the back-end process, so kind of building IoT ingestion systems that could look after, at the time, nearly 2 million devices and receive those messages and then like make sense of them from a business perspective. So I kind of then transitioned into IoT firmware primarily because some of the issues that those devices had, through the firmware, had downstream impacts on the back end. So kind of wanted to understand, how that sort of stuff worked and how it was designed and stuff. So yeah, kind of ended up getting into the full stack of IoT eventually, and that's kind of where we are today.
Cool. I got into IoT, and Allyn Technology Group was founded in 2000. And at the time, we were doing radio frequency identification tracking for warehouses and high-value assets in the museum and trade show industries. If you went to the Sony trade show when they launched PlayStation, somebody actually forgot the logo that went on the PlayStation booth for Comdex, and so they were overnighting the thing on a jet, a very expensive jet, to get it to Las Vegas in time. And so we hooked up RFID tags and started doing data telemetry for warehouses, and then 9/11 happened, and we were asked to start tracking shipping containers and railroad cars. And so that kind of springboarded Allyn Tech into doing all sorts of tracking and cellular and all IoT from there. So.
Awesome. Love hearing all the different backgrounds, so I think it's great mix of experiences. And would also love to hear just over the years, like some of the successful IoT implementations or projects that you think have had one of the most significant impacts on your industry. And feel free, this is meant to be more conversational. It doesn't need to be so interview style, so feel free to talk whenever you'd like to. You don't have to
I'll go first. So probably the thing that's had the most profound impact on me in terms of successful was the work we did in East Africa. So we used IoT as a way of securing assets in a way that allowed people on very low incomes to displace kerosene in their homes with like personal solar units. So we shipped about 1.2 million of those in the end. Massive increases in health, because people weren't ingesting these kind of like fumes from kerosene, and it's actually turned out to be cheaper than kerosene as well. And we moved into refrigeration and TV and stuff like that. So it's really set me on a journey of like using IoT, probably in places that people wouldn't immediately think they could be, and you'll see in my talk later on how we've, kind of further developed that through 4RD. So seeing that on the ground impact of like technology that was really great and kind of counts as one of my, proudest moments, I suppose, as an engineer.
Awesome.
That sounds much more robust and globally helpful than doing either asset tracking or environmental data monitoring, for sure. I think that, from my experiences over the years of where IoT has been helpful, right now we've got projects going in the environmental space for construction, home energy is becoming an interesting place to be. Water quality monitoring, I spent a lot of years in water quality monitoring, everything from streams to stormwater ponds. You know, if your Walmart parking lot, stormwater ponds filling up, that's a problem. That's not something as lovely as what you might be doing in other countries, but there's big fines associated with it. So the world thinks that's the business world thinks it's a good idea to avoid those big fines. So that's what's funding that IoT project.
Well, and I think that's what makes it so interesting is there's all of these different applications that can be done and have been done. So,
And our side, I think the most impactful for our business has been our project with Schneider Electric. So it's by far the biggest project that we've taken on. It's like a 2-year process to port their application. They were using WinForms on Windows, and they have a product called Harmony, which is it's a platform, and one element of it is the HMI. They needed to go from WinForms to something cross-platform, and they kind of took a gamble on us as a business because at that point we've got a few customers, but we weren't that proven. We certainly hadn't worked with a company of that size on a project of that scope. Through us being able to work with them and build that solution, and we solved a really big problem for them. You know, they no longer have to buy Windows licenses. They don't have to worry about the, I think, confusing story of Windows embedded. They can just use Linux. Through them doing that, they've basically bootstrapped our business and allowed us to take the core team and contributors. Avalonia has been open source for 10 years, and people have been grinding for free to build this platform. Through that project, we've been able to, as I say, bootstrap the business, employ the core contributors, and not have to take on outside funding. So from our perspective, the Schneider Electric HMI project is the most influential and impactful for our business.
Awesome. And we've talked about it a little bit, some of the challenges that we have with IoT, and we like high level with security. But what do you think either over time or right now has been the biggest challenge that you're facing or have faced recently?
A lot of it has to do, and sound like a Metal Wilderness Labs commercial today with the work on the cellular technology, that backhaul to cell phones. We've got Verizon VPNs that we've had to establish. There's the whole security process of logging into those networks. All that data that you're collecting only does good if it can find its way. We always call it send it back to mom. Mom's got to be able to see what's going on with all of the devices that are out in the field. So pulling that backhaul back and the connectivity and all the different protocols and trying to manage that, I think that's been one of the impediments of IoT is between all the different protocols and hookups that have to happen. There isn't really a great standard out there. MQTT is kind of coming along as that, and more, with the IoT hub with Azure and some of that kind of stuff. But just constructing that, I remember I've got an environmental company back east that I'm working with, and for them to adopt the technology, all that it took to get connected and get the relationship with the cell company and get that network, the VPN, like I said, the VPN hooked up, that was a big challenge for them.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think with certainly connectivity is a big challenge, particularly in the developing economies, and roaming tariffs and stuff like that really makes things very complicated. But more broadly than that, it's if you think about IoT or delivering a successful IoT project, I can't think of many other things that need such a breadth of skills. So right from the front, you're like looking at like hardware engineering, as Brian touched on, you've got embedded software, you've got back-end services, and then you've got data analytics and machine learning right on the other end if you're going to do like anomaly detection and some of the stuff we do with fraud and stuff. So for even medium-sized businesses to be able to have teams that have skills in all of those things are really challenging. When you overlay like the general kind of shortage of skills more generally in software development, and then you're asking one business to sort of have such a breadth of specialisms is a real tough ask. And you'll always find, and some of the projects that we've had to go in and help with Applicita is that there'll be a blind spot somewhere in someone's organization. It could be, as Fred says, in like communications, or it could be in security, or it'll be in like embedded, and you end up having to like plug holes for people because that was the thing that they didn't know much about, or they, you know, were really struggling with. So delivering successful IoT projects is fairly unique. I can't really, like I say, don't really think of anything else that has that particular problem.
And to add on to that, a lot of the companies that are trying to implement IoT are really doing something else, right?
That's not their thing.
My company the company I'm working with back east, they're doing construction site monitoring. If somebody's building a new I-5 or I-405 and they dig up too much dust, well, we need to run a water truck out there because they're going to get an EPA fine, or they're digging up a Superfund site and there's all sorts of bad stuff that came up in the air. Well, that's their job. They're trying to solve part of that problem by bringing this IoT technology in to notify them that bad things are in the air. And so how do you add all those skills that he just talked about to what they're doing, which is construction site monitoring?
100% that,
Yeah, I think from our side, we see a skills gap. So it's hardware is hard. There's absolutely no question about that. But the software for hardware is hard. As Brian said, you know, a lot of it it's kind of very isolated from what I see. People are reinventing the wheels in basically every company. And even within a company, there are teams all inventing the same things. And no one's really sharing what they're working on. And they're working in like, I look at their tooling and it's like looking at someone programming in the 80s. It's just so archaic.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, when I look at the .NET ecosystem and then compare it to these guys that are writing C and C++, I just kind of scratch my head. Why do they do that? So yeah, there's a skills shortage because there's not that many people that want to go into that kind of level of specialism. But also the general environment, it's not easy. You know, Linux is the bedrock for HMIs and a lot of embedded, and Linux is a pretty difficult system to learn. You've got to really spend a lot of time to get to know it. And as a .NET developer, I mean, that's my background. For me, you know, the big button, you press the button and it runs. That isn't how Linux works. Linux, you need to be in the CLI and you need to spend like 2 weeks mastering it just to get your apps to run. And I think that there's an opportunity for companies like Wilderness Labs and for Avalonia to build tooling to make that more accessible to your average developer. You shouldn't need to be a savant in order to be able to build for embedded. It should be more accessible to everyone. And I think that comes from providing better tooling to make it more accessible.
I remember when I first got involved in looking at the situation around generating firmware, and I was asking around in the business that we were working in, saying like, okay, so how do you do like test validation and stuff? You know, have you got like, you know, automation frameworks, you know, do you write unit tests and stuff? And they like thought I had two heads. And they were like, what's that then? You know? And I said, well, what happens when the modem goes, like, you know, when they stop making the modem and stuff? They say, oh, yeah, we have to rewrite all of the software from scratch. And I'm like, what? Don't you have any like abstraction? And they were like, no, not really. And I did eventually. I thought, oh, it's just maybe our organization. So I just went and did a bunch of more research and I did find one or two organizations that had like developed a HAL, you know, a hardware abstraction layer that sort of sat between, you know, the stuff, but it was really rare. Like most people were like, hey, yeah, we just do exploratory testing, AKA test it in the field and hope that we can load firmware on it when we find an issue. Or yeah, just kind of like rebuilding software, like squeezing it, you know, as hardware change, you know, just kind of like do those. So all this stuff that I got used to in the enterprise, you know, as being a .NET developer and being in it, just wasn't there, you know, and you just kind of like, there must be a better way of doing this, you know, surely, you know, which is where sort of, you know, one of the things that when we saw what was happening with Meadow, we were like, okay, this is it. This is, you know, this is the way forward, you know.
We did a project with Bonneville Power where we were doing demand energy control for home hot water heaters. If you're a utility and you have a power outage, well, one of the problems is that everybody comes back on all at the same time. Another thing that was interesting was that with all of the renewable energy push that was going on in 2010 for sure, that if you took a shower in the morning and you went to work at 6 o'clock, you probably don't care when your hot water tank warmed up, as long as that when you got home at 5 o'clock, it was warm. So if we could use hydro or renewable like solar or wind energy to recharge that water heater versus coal or something else, wouldn't that be cool? So we did this project with Bonneville Well, one of the challenges, especially in rural areas, is which cellular company is going to work. And to your point about the modem, well, all right, you do it against Verizon, cool, but now you got to get a different modem to go against T-Mobile or to go against some other thing, and now you're rewriting all that code. In order to be able to just say, well, invoke the modem on Meadow, that's the way to do that.
100%.
Promise, none of these responses. There's lots of Meadow plugs, but nothing is. It's all organic. This is great. Love hearing that. So shifting gears away from like problems, like how do you actually see the industry emerging, right? What do you think is coming next, or what do you hope to come next? What are you most excited about? But looking forward, what do you see?
Yeah, I think for me, I think the dust is settling a little bit in IoT. Like I look at, like, for instance, like what's going on at the moment with AI, and I would look back to, the IoT kind of push, and there was all sorts of, interesting sort of discussion going around. And now we're getting into a maturity place where the IoT, where there's like some consolidation and some standardization coming, which is helpful, I think, for people who don't understand the landscape, because there's almost like too many options, too many ways to do things. And probably global internet connectivity is probably the next big thing that I think, to Fred's point, to my point, I could talk to you literally all day about the challenges around connecting IoT devices like globally, because we've done it for like pretty much every continent, and how difficult that is. And just being, whether that's Starlink or whether it's like some other service where that just becomes like a not a thing anymore, where we just like, that will probably take, I don't know, maybe 35 to 40% of the complexity away from like delivering IoT at scale, just being able to, get into the cloud and like do that. And I'm pretty excited about when that comes, in terms of, and how that's going to be made available, without governments getting, too involved and, making that thing more difficult again with legislation or whatever. But they're probably the big things that I'm looking for. I mean, of course, Meadow, and that sort of being able to build things at scale without it become. That's the only way it's going to scale. It's the only way it's going to grow, is if you can make it more democratized, like doing it. Take it out of the hands of like the super smart, super specialist people, and give it more to the wider community of like really talented developers out there that just don't have the time or the bandwidth to like learn all this like really like edge case stuff. So yeah, that's going to be cool.
Yeah, Brian was talking about earlier that modular, the NuGet package that you can download. I mean, how many times do you need a full wave rectifier and have to come up with that? How much, those kinds of parts and pieces, you should be able to just go and get them. I know there's some technologies. I think I was looking at Flux AI has got some idea of CAD that's heading in that direction as well. But these problems have been solved over and over and over again for all the different IoT projects. You need a cell modem, you need to be able to collect data, sensor data, you need this, this, and this. Body parts, just plug them together. And so where are those body parts? Why aren't they just available? Well, Adafruit can't be really the only place that they exist, right? So
yeah, we don't have a great track record, right? Of anybody who's tried to plug a UK laptop into an American main system is like, if we can't organize the mains plugs, right, then we seem to have an issue with plugs, right? Like connected, like worldwide, plugged in connectors, maybe we're like, but yeah, you're right. It kind of making some of that stuff more accessible, and some of the announcements we've done today with the CCM stuff is massive. It will be so much easier for us to put like these fast prototypes together that we do for, the demand is there, just to say that, we, 4RD, aren't able to take on every project we're asked to take on. It's like drinking out of a fire hose, right? There's so many applications of this kind of thing that we, and it's because the effort that we still have to provide in, like, spinning prototypes and building software and all that kind of stuff. We don't have enough people. So anything that we can shorten the effort required to do some proof of concepts means we can help more people, and that can only be a good thing.
Yeah, and that effort of something as simple as something as not simple as over-the-air updates. Yeah. The ability to have that as a function. And there's still, everybody wants to protect their intellectual property. But at the end of the day, like, just to be simplistic about it, 4-wave or rectifiers, there's no IP there, people. And so
you kind of want all that stuff to be commercialized, so that you can just focus on your USP, right? It's like the thing that, you don't want to have to, even think about whether you're generating any intellectual property in any of those spaces, because you shouldn't, that's not your thing, right? So yeah, you're right.
It's about core competencies, right? You've
Work
got
on
your
it.
core
Yeah.
competencies, and that's what you should be laser focused on
Yeah.
as a business. And I think, over-the-air updates is a perfect example of this.
Mm.
My team were talking about this like a year and a half ago, of building out basically what you've built with the over-the-air updates for our HMI. And I say to the guys, like, we'll put it on the roadmap, but let's put it really far down, because the security implications of this, we need to get it right. And if we don't get it right, it's going to be a big liability. And it is a difficult problem to solve.
Yeah.
And that's not in our wheelhouse. We build the UI platform, but it's like we could commercialize that, sure. So to be able to trust somebody else that they can come in and provide that to you, it just works. And that allows you to focus on delivering value to your customers. As I say, it's all about reinventing the wheel. Just minimize that, and you're in a good position.
Yeah, I think, I mean, Brian alluded to it earlier, but one of our most interesting failures was a bug that we put into our bootloader, which we didn't realize. This was pre-Meadow days, that we weren't considering the battery level in the devices. So we were kicking off these over-the-air updates, and then if the device didn't have sufficient power, it would brick the unit. So Nigeria is a pretty big place, so is Kenya, right? So asking people to take their units to their local service center so we can put a USB stick in them to get them back up and running again was a lesson well learned, and we quickly got on top of it. And we took a very similar approach in the end to the bootloader that we've done in Meadow. But yeah, it was we thought we had it. We thought we'd got on top of this thing, and then we were like, these devices are not coming back. What's going on? So yeah, it's tricky, really, really hard.
We had a similar problem with a Cat M1 module provider, that there was the phase of the moon and the time of the day, and bye-bye.
It would just never phone home.
So much
again,
for that. So yeah, that over-the-air updates is a really big deal.
Yeah.
Having that ability in a cloud environment, being able to push your updates. Customers' demands change.
Yeah.
Technology changes, and why bring it back to the office if you don't have it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think one of the changes that I've seen and that really excites me is the fact that devices are getting more powerful. And it's kind of expected, but what I'm seeing is stuff that it would always have been kind of function over form. It's now getting some form. It's now starting to look nice. So an example of that is the SpaceX rocket. You think about their dashboard inside. That should be a really functional thing, right? But it looks gorgeous. Someone spent a lot of time making that really nice to look at. And I see that with some of the HMI stuff that our customers are building. There's a company in France that builds, it's mind-blowing to me. I don't really understand the science of it, but it's measuring particles. And they've got a little embedded Linux device, and it's got really nice animations. And it's the kind of thing you would expect to see at a consumer electronics show.
Yeah.
It's just really well produced, and you can see someone spent a lot of time and effort creating a delightful experience for something that's really niche and really functional. And I'm excited about that even the mundane and boring hardware is starting to get that level of polish that we see from our mobile devices and our general consumer computing.
And it's going to need to, because as IoT expands in the marketplace, the level, it's not going to be the EE engineer that's going to be using that piece of industrial information or instrumentation. It's going to be the construction person, or it's going to be the home consumer that's going to be using it. So yeah, my Nest thermostat's great, but you go out to the construction site and it's, you open up the manual just to push the right button to get the little display.
And this one might be a little tough because we each have different perspectives, but would love to get a sense of what industries you think will be the most impacted over the next couple of years. And again, you might just have your view, but would love to get your opinion on that.
I think all industries. I can't think of a single industry that isn't going to be impacted. I walked down to Starbucks this morning to get a cup of coffee, and in Italy, where I lived, the coffee machines are like well, they're older than I am by probably 100 years. They're super basic. But over here, the coffee machines, it's got a screen inside of it. And I know from one of the Microsoft conferences that that's streaming data up into Azure, and they're running machine learning models on it to make the best espresso. Chips and IoT are in everything. And so I don't think there is any single industry that isn't going to be affected. I think that we're on a drive, and it's not going to stop, that we just keep adding technology to everything to deliver better experiences and better products for the end user.
Yeah, I mean, I will be slightly biased, I suppose, but an industry that, you know, you wouldn't immediately sort of see being impacted by IoT is the financial sector. So, you know, banks and banking in general is sort of pretty slow to move, particularly in the developing world. But in the developing economies where they don't have this sort of, you know, they're not pulling this anchor of legacy, you know, they had mobile payments way before like Europe, you know. So like my co-founder, Dr. Nick Hughes, he invented this system called M-Pesa, which is like digital payments and digital wallet system, which was running on SMS and feature phones. And we're seeing, you know, and talking to banks about different ways of managing, you know, credit risk using IoT. So like, you know, giving them different ways of building credit models to allow them to sort of, you know, provide liquidity or capital to, you know, mostly businesses, but some personal individuals as well, using IoT. And that's one of the really sort of exciting things that, you know, I think there's people, you know, I meet with many people, and, you know, they sort of say, you know, how are you applying IoT? And you tell them like, yeah, financial inclusion. And they're like, what? How do you do that? You know? So, yeah, like to your point, I don't think there's many industries that that you can't be impacted. And I think there's like another level down as well, you know, like what Fred does with, you know, they, on the surface, they look like fairly obvious things for IoT. But there's like a whole probably new level of like engagement and refinement that those guys will go through, you know, whether it's, you know, monitoring like the position of containers and stuff, because it's where the physical world touches the virtual world. And yeah, pretty much anything in that space will be impacted over the next sort of few years. And, you know, the devices need to get cheaper, they need to consume less energy, and they need to get more powerful. And the more that they do that, the more things will come into the window in terms of, you know, how it can be, you know, how it can be sort of positively impacted with IoT.
Yeah, we built a sensor system that was being used in first responders. Again, a lot of the work that I did early on kind of was influenced by 9/11. And while we were doing trade show monitoring, basically what we had was the ability to monitor some conditions with radio and watch a warehouse. And after 9/11, Homeland Security asked us if we could take that device and put it on a shipping container, because we were worried about dirty bombs coming into ports and shipping containers. And so now you have basically a cell phone or satellite phone with some sensors that's sitting in a box in a container. Kind of an extension to that is you have a first responder who is running up to a scene and trying to evaluate why that barrel is on fire and what kind of problems that barrel is going to present other than just the fire itself. And so we actually were building sensor packs they were sewing into firefighters and police first responders, so that when they got up to a scene, we had a little bit of a GPS idea where they were, but we were also detecting radiation and VOCs. And so that was being radioed back to them, to the command center, so they could tell whether or not it was something, all right, go ahead and shoot that with a hose or get the heck out of there.
That's very cool. Yeah.
And so think about that if you're going to deploy that on a broader scale. You're right. We need lower power. We need that to be more integrated. And how do you then deploy that such that the fire department can talk to the police department? Because we have radio problems at the very basic level. Forget about IoT, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Awesome. And then I guess for organizations getting started, what advice do you have, right? Like, what for just they're getting started, they want to connect more things. What do you
Apart from choosing Meadow?
buy Wilderness Labs
Right.
products.
telling you? did not tell them to say
Ah,
this.
You didn't tell, you didn't have to.
So probably like it's like every sort of successful technology project, is like what does done look like?
Yeah.
So like try not to get too hung up early on the what we call the shiny bits, the hardware and the bits and bobs and stuff. Do some planning up front, in terms of like what's the outcome that you're seeking, and kind of work back from there. We've been fortunate enough or unfortunate enough, depending on the point of view, to be sort of asked to go and look at some dumpster fire IoT projects that are kind of going awry. And pretty much you can always go back to, there was no clear understanding of like what the goal was. They just started doing stuff, and it was like, okay, well, we'll see where this goes. And it's like, yeah, no, but you need to have a broad idea of what you're trying to achieve. So my advice to anybody that's looking to get a successful IoT project is, try and put those goals together and then work your way back to, and like the enemy of all technology projects is like, try and keep it as simple as you can, but no simpler. People like me, people like lots of people that are in this room, love complexity and love detail and love, all of those kind of things. And you can quickly get run away with, with technology, and you need to just make sure that you keep a handle on complexity. And Meadow does, again, does a great job of isolating you away from like excessive amounts of complexity that kind of like will grind your project, in terms of, progress and outcome.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And, don't try to over design it, because there's a lot of stuff that's been solved before. And that's one of the funny things about, I think our industry, the embedded design industry, is that you start looking at things from the IC and resistor perspective when, there's actually a module that does all that for me. Right? And now if you can find a way to put those modules together and solve your problem, then
I think even Mike would agree. The trouble is we're creative animals, right? So we want to go to creation like straight away, right? And you need to stand back and look at the bigger picture to say, actually, that's where the creation is going on. It's not actually in the lines of code I write, or the like you say, the electronic design that I do, or the user interface module I put together. You need to get your creativity fix in a sort of bigger picture way, not get into that detail and want to reinvent everything, because that's not a productive way to be. Very fulfilling, but not very productive.
So I was originally going to say you should just play, but actually in hindsight, on reflection, that's horrible advice. Don't just play, have a plan. But I was going to say, because I think a lot of people they go for the planning and they over plan it. My guys will just, they'll spend weeks arguing over, we call it bike shedding. They're arguing over the minutiae. It's like,
do goal setting.
So, we're trying to build a nuclear reactor. Don't worry about the bike sheds. So I was going to say, just have a play and have some fun. I think that at the beginning of the project, that's fine to do. Throw it away once you've done that, and then actually generate a plan. But explore the different options. Don't just assume that the technology that you already know, if you're a C or a C++ developer, and that's your bread and butter, don't assume that that's going to be the right tech for this project. Try other things, experiment, and spend a little bit of time getting a bit uncomfortable before committing.
Well, and at the risk of another blatant plug for Wilderness Labs, one of the cool things about that project lab board was that it actually helped me show a customer, look, here's some really simple possible things. 90% of what you want is already built. That just proves the point that we don't have to go through a massive design project, because these components exist. They've been put together in a lovely package. Now let's take that and expand it for the 10% that you need for your particular application. And the beauty, again, because it's all open source, we'll come back at the end and we'll solve that problem your specific way, with your own board, because intellectual property is important. I get it. But there's a demonstration. It's out of the box and ready to go. You
do realize, of course, that we're effectively sawing off our own branches, right? Because we make it like super simple that anybody can do it. Like,
some of those branches need to be sawed. Because
some of us people who own or work in companies that help these other companies do that will be out of work. But I guess that would be job done at that point. If kind of like everybody could could do it. I think the your point about playing is kind of like valid, but don't let your management team take your proof of concept as the okay, well, let's just push that out into production, right? Like, how many times has that happened, right? You've got to make sure that you kind of like don't allow that to happen, because we've seen that happen as well. You know, stuff that's got out into the field where, you know, they were just told, yeah, just go do it, you know, and like it's like, whoa, that was just an idea. You know, you're going to have to do what Brian was talking about. You know, kind of like prototype, and then go for scale afterwards, because they're different things, you know. But I love the project board as well. Like, the cost of failure with the project board is like, it comes back to your point about playing. You know, you kind of you know, because the cost of getting it wrong is like super low, right? You're like, oh yeah, I'll unplug that sensor then and like plug something different in, or I'll like change the piece of code. What holds back innovation, certainly in this space, is that the cost of doing anything is really expensive. So that makes the people with the, you know, with their hands around the purse, it's like, hey, look, like, don't do anything too risky, because if this goes wrong, it's all wasted money and costs a lot of money. So yeah, things like the project board, I think, are a massive enabler for that. You know, you can take some risks and, you know, fail early and learn some stuff, you know.
I think that playing actually in the long term minimizes the risk.
Yeah,
because it affords you the opportunity to make those mistakes early on in the process.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think you should play all the way to delivery, but I think that at the beginning of the process, I think it's an essential part.
Yeah, it's about knowledge acquisition and the cost of that, right? It's kind of like you know, people employ companies like mine to acquire that knowledge quickly through us showing or telling or whatever. But another way of doing that is to do research and development, you know, like kind of like, and you know, acquire the knowledge that way. And you know, that's one of the great things about Meadow, is it really allows you to sort of like shrink the cost of acquiring that knowledge, you know.
Well, the last question, which you've kind of already talked through the whole time, and we had a lot of announcements earlier too. What excites you the most about what Wilderness Labs is working on?
All of that.
Well, for me, it's the work that the guys have been doing on cloud, on Meadow Windows. Sorry, so like closing that like developer loop, like being able to like do true like development, and the work that Chris and Brian and stuff have been doing. That there's I think only one other example I've seen that's like nowhere near as good as the guys have already got it in the industry, of being able to like take out the board and doing that deployment stuff. That for me is game changing, in the sense of, you know, orders of magnitude more than like anything else the industry has done. Because you know, like no matter how fast your developer workstation is or whatever, you lose, you know, a couple of minutes. I mean, when the Meadow first came out, right, it was like I could make coffee and it would go cold, right, before like it was like up and running, right. But the guys have done an amazing job to like shrink that deployment time, but it's still a deployment time. And it's a bit like doing mobile development, you know, even with like Xamarin in the early days and a bunch of other stuff. It was like getting it onto a handset and doing all that kind of stuff was slowed the developer down. So I'm super excited for that, and putting that in the hands of our developers will literally save us time and our clients money.
For me, it's watching 30 years of my career turn into 4 modules that Meadow's selling for $50.
We're all going to be technical debt eventually, right? Yeah, that's inevitable, right?
Yeah, you know, we've had a platform that's been out certainly since 2000, that's spanned, you know, asset tracking, water quality, air quality monitoring. And using the Meadow products, I was basically able to replicate all of the hardware side of things in about 4 months, from the code down to the hardware itself. We still have some production issues to make that into actually, you know, the product that will sit out in the sun and rain for forever. But the ability to do that, and now that is something I can get a .NET developer to do support for, instead of trying to find that C++ developer. And so really, that has been the beautiful thing about Wilderness, is making this something that's really supportable and really expandable.
The thing that excites me about it is watching other people's excitement about it. So my COO, he's got a background in electrical engineering. And when I told them about Wilderness Labs, like the core team, they were like, like you don't understand. Like it's obviously running on like a Pi or something. I was like, no, it's on an MCU. And like, no, it's not. You're not understanding properly. I was like, check out the website. And then they come back and they're like, oh my God, what the hell? How are they doing this? And it's like just this constant like stream of messages of them going back and forth. It's like, this is crazy. How is this possible? I gave a guest lecture at Plymouth University for their software engineers for their computer science course. And again, I mentioned Wilderness Labs. I said it's full .NET, the full .NET running on an MCU. And the professor was like, no, you're not understanding, that's impossible. And I was like, you think that, but I guarantee it's true. I was like, no, let's have a look. And they pull it up and they're like, what the hell? How is this possible? So I think that to me is really exciting, that there's like, 8 million .NET developers? Yeah. And now they're all IoT developers. They're all able to build and deploy hardware using their pre-existing knowledge and their pre-existing tools. So yeah, I mean, we've always had like .NET, Nano.NET or like .NET Compact, and we've had kind of really
Windows IoT Core and
they're just,
a bunch of other.
They're not very good, are they?
Yeah.
And then you've got
they weren't finished, were they? That was the
but
thing.
they're a minimal subset, and I don't like a small slice. I want the whole pie. Thank you very much. So to be able to have all of .NET and all of that goodness and be able to reuse all of that code on these tiny little devices is just mind blowing. So that really excites me.
Awesome. Well, that's it. Thank you guys for joining the panel, talking about your background. We're going to be taking lunch break now, both for the live stream we'll be back on in an hour. But yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Awesome.